Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. This time around, we need to talk about something that's a bit unexpected. China and Trump camp are talking up the prospects of U.S.-China collaboration. Now, if that pairing leaves you scratching your head, trust me, you're not alone. You'd be forgiven for wondering if we all slip into an alternate universe. Now, let's be clear. Collaboration talk between the United States and China isn't new. There's been a decade-long dance of will they, won't they, reminiscent of Ross and Rachel, except this isn't a sitcom. This is the global stage. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report.
China and the US have had a very rocky relationship during Donald Trump's first term as president. He went on record to say that COVID-19 had strained relations, though China's foreign minister has expressed hopes that the new administration would work with Beijing. This series of comments isn't anything new in the world of the mixed signals Trump has been sending about his approach to China. Shortly after the attempt on his life, he had this to say about Chinese President Xi Jinping.
And I got along very well with President Xi. He's a great guy. He wrote me a beautiful note the other day.
In yet another turn of events, Trump dissuaded China and other BRICS members from creating a new currency to use instead of the dollar. He threatened to impose 100% tariffs on them and ban sales to the US economy. Trump taking a much more hawkish approach to trade relations with Beijing isn't new. His previous administration had already turned up the heat, and Joe Biden continued in kind. Comments such as this one from the Chinese Foreign Ministry aren't uncommon.
China urges relevant U.S. politicians to stop politicizing and weaponizing economic and trade issues.
But the secrets and details of how exactly this trade game will play out, where the battle lines will be drawn, still hide deep inside of Donald Trump's mind.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Once upon a time, there were summits, state visits, and cheerful handshakes that made everyone say maybe the two largest economies can play nice. Then things got messy. Trade disputes erupted like volcanoes, technology bans fell like dominoes, and suddenly TikTok became a national security flashpoint rather than a platform for dance videos. Relations sour faster than milk left in the sun, and now we're supposed to believe everyone is open to cooperation again? The question is, why now? Well, for China, playing up the idea of collaboration might be a strategic move to stabilize ties, alleviate some tariffs, or keep American hawks at bay. For Trump, meanwhile, talking about collaboration could be a way to appear forward-thinking or just plain contrary to the narrative that he always wants conflict. After all, Trump has made a career out of zigging when people expect him to zag. When everyone thinks he'll double down on being tough on China, maybe he's testing a good cop, bad cop routine. Let's think about what collaboration might mean. It could involve trade deals that live neutral prosperity. It might be about climate change, where the United States and China just might unite for the cameras to look like responsible global actors before slipping back into passive-aggressive rivalry. It could mean more dialogue, a diplomatic word for a series of awkward meetings that produce carefully worded joint statements that no one reads. Whatever form it takes, this sudden talk of cooperation is suspiciously timed. For Beijing, this is part of a larger narrative. China's leadership has always liked to position itself as pragmatic, steady, and solution-oriented, never mind the times that it has played economic hardball or flexed its muscles in the South China Sea. If it can point to its willingness to cooperate, Beijing can say to the world, look at us trying to be nice. If those Americans mess it up, that's on them. Meanwhile, for Donald Trump, who once described himself as tariff man, suddenly praising the idea of working together with China might be an attempt to recast himself as a deal maker once more. Because let's face it, I made great deals with China sounds a lot better than I drove us into trade war that no one really won. A cynic might say that both sides are talking big but will deliver little. And the truth is, words are cheap. Throwing around the word collaboration is easy. Actually delivering on it, now that's the hard part. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Martin Shipignac, a chief economist at the Central European Institute of Asian Studies. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, good morning.
So we are looking at a pretty interesting turn of events. The Trump camp is now talking about closer collaboration with China. This is a very stark contrast to some of the messaging that Donald Trump have been putting out for a couple of years now. What's contributing to kind of this change of rhetoric?
I think you need to look at who is driving his foreign policy, and we see there are maybe three different camps or different strands that are driving that. You have people like Michael Waltz or Marco Rubio, who are quite hawkish, ideologically hawkish on China. You have his advisors like Elbridge Colby, who are looking at it from a more geopolitical game perspective. But also there is Donald Trump, who has his transactional business-like approach. And I think what we are seeing now in the past few days or weeks has been that this transactional perspective has been coming to the fore. And that is obviously underpinned by the fact that he is very closely collaborating with the billionaire Elon Musk, who has strong interest in China. So I think what we are seeing now is this side of his, let's say, political portfolio coming to the fore. But that might not be his consistent policy for the next 4 years, because at points other people in his administration may be driving his China policy.
Right. Unpredictable, I think, is the term to describe Donald Trump here. We remember his situation, his dealing with North Korea, where one day it seems like they're going to war and the other they seem to be best friends. So can we expect something like this going forward as well when it comes to volatility with his dealing with China?
I think so, and the Chinese are also thinking so. They are preparing for this volatility, and as I said, this volatility comes from the fact that we have different groups of people within his administration holding different views on China and vying for power or influence on their own. Right? What these people have in common is there may be loyalty to President Trump, but apart from that, they may have very different ideological views. So depending on which camp is currently or is able to gain the upper hand, then this will define his policy to China or to other countries around the world. So yes, a lot of it will depend on volatility, on which a lot of these drives the volatility, and also it will also depend what kind of incentives President Trump will see in a short, or medium or long term, and if he's going to respond to those or not.
All right, there's two lines of thinking when it comes to the unpredictability of Donald Trump. Now, some people are seeing it as a positive, where it can keep his adversaries on their toes. On the other hand, people are also worried that he might be too unpredictable, that his own team will not be able to keep up with the messaging and the direction that things are going. What's your take on this?
I think it can be both. When we look at the first one, that it can be a strength against adversaries. The thing is that the adversaries have learned about that, right? The Chinese in 2016, they didn't know what they're expecting from President Trump, and actually they were in a wake of just responding to what he was driving, right? The trade wars, for example. He was driving the agenda because they could not potentially understand where he was coming from, what he's trying to do. But this time they've learned about him. They know he's still unpredictable, and he will remain unpredictable. But they adjusted their strategy to kind of fortify their positions. And that's not just the Chinese. The Russians understand how President Trump is likely to act and communicate, and the same goes for other adversaries the United States may have around the world. So I think adversaries have learned the lesson from the first Trump presidency, and unpredictability will still be a leverage, but not the type of leverage that we've seen in his during his first term.
Right, now, looking at it from the Chinese perspective, we do know that they do traditionally have, the tendency of establishing trade ties and perhaps even trying to get countries to be reliant on said tie. Do you think that's going to be an issue as well going forward if the U.S. starts to invest in China to the extent where it's really hard to separate the two economically?
I think China has this long-term strategy of preventing this dependency on the United States and trying to reduce the economic or financial leverage the Americans may have over China. So they've been trying to indigenize the supply chains, brings manufacturing back to China, not leave it abroad. But also they have this risk management approach called China Plus One, where companies are encouraged to produce both in China and abroad to avoid negative implications of whatever policy may the American president adopt. So in that sense, the Chinese have been preparing for that and are kind of engaging in risk management. On the other hand, if there are signs that there can be some sort of deal that the Chinese can agree on, or that if there is something beneficial for the Chinese side, I'm sure that their transactional side will also show, and they'll be able to talk and communicate with Donald Trump. But as I said, they will even if they show a positive type of engagement, they will always try to look after their back, and they will continue pursuing like risk management and making sure that if there is a change of heart on a whim, as they can be with President Trump, that they are prepared for all such eventualities.
What about the other way around? Is there a possibility where the United States will start relying too much on China for its economic prowess, its cheap labor, manufacturing? Because, well, Trump famously criticized Germany back in 2016 for the over-reliance of Russian energy to sustain its own economy. But won't he be doing the same if too much of economic tie is now established with China?
He would, but I do not expect that to increase in a substantial manner. We can see potentially. Currently, President Trump is saying that there will be tariffs and whatnot on China, although he's been backing down on those statements a little bit. However, there can be a certain reversal of this attitude. However, I think it's not only President Trump, it's also the American economic actors, it's companies and investors who are also kind of understanding there is too much volatility, and that we're not going back to, say, the situation 10 years ago where investment in China, the U.S. investment, or other countries' investment in China was increasing, was high, as the American companies themselves are being more prudent and establishing production elsewhere. So we may see this increase in dependency or increase in trade investment in certain sectors. And now we are thinking again of President Trump's close ally Elon Musk and the sectors of electric mobility, electric vehicles, but also perhaps clean energy. Although I believe that there will be certain continuity with the previous or outgoing administration, which has tried to decrease those dependencies and move production back to the United States, also for both economic reasons to produce jobs in America, but also for security reasons to not let the United States exposed to Chinese leverage.
All right, and if, let's say, hypothetically, these two largest economies in the world can indeed play nice with each other, what does that mean for the rest of the world? Do you think economically it'll be more beneficial for the rest of the players, or do you think that will kind of become a giant monopoly of the two biggest players dominating everyone else?
I think it would be the former, although that everyone would benefit because the United States as the largest consumer in the world, the China as the largest producer in the world, if they play along nicely, they can it can spill over to other countries. The benefits of economic engagement could spill over to other countries. I do not think that the United States and China could be in some position of duopoly, creating economic governance for the whole world together, because their interests are pretty divergent, and I think there will be too much friction to kind of establish that. But there will be certainly more benefit to that. Also, I don't think the economic governance, the joint economic governance of China and the United States is possible, because what we've seen is more that the United States is trying to kind of protect its position, its market share, its influence, while China has been trying to increase. And really, we see those two interests colliding. So I would rather think that if there is a kind of smart collaboration between those two, it will be to more of a providing economic governance for the whole world, from which everyone could benefit.
Right, so the two countries playing nice doesn't mean that they're just best friends now. Perhaps there are still, of course, limitations there. And last but not least, I'm also worried about the geopolitical situation, though. Do you think that closer trade ties between China and U.S. will mean the diminishing of presence of countries in the South China Sea while China still continues to encroach on them? Do you think that the U.S. will be a little more hesitant to step in?
I think that might be the case because the United States, especially President Trump, has been kind of obsessed with the fact that everyone should be responsible for their security, and is pushing countries to increase spending. It's not only NATO countries in Europe, but it's also countries in East and Southeast Asia. So there might be a little bit of hesitance on the Trump administration side to step in. On the other hand, I think if the United States were to play nice with China, I think they would play perhaps like two-pronged games. Like on one hand being nice with China because that would be to their economic benefit, but on the other hand, I think they would still maintain strong ties with their close allies in the region, not abandoning them. I'm thinking here perhaps the Philippines, perhaps Taiwan and countries, South Korea, obviously, which is in another geopolitical hotspot. So I think we would rather see a two-pronged strategy, playing nice to China, but at the same time supporting the allies, rather than being all out nice to China and then reducing support or backing for their allies in the region.
Right. So do you think it's like a two-way street situation where if there are indeed business ties established, then maybe that could be a tool to hinder China a bit if they ever think about encroaching on some of the U.S. allies?
Not say it's hindering, but perhaps it's more. It's a way of perhaps trying to get China to cooperate rather than creating antagonism. It's something also that the Chinese have been perhaps more willing to accept recently due to the weakening of their economic growth and some certain structural issues in their economy. So I think trading and being nice with China is just a simple liberal approach that if we are nice and if we work and exchange together, then that there is less lower likelihood of conflict and frictions arising on the horizon. So I think that would be the main argument. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for your input and insight and helping us break all of this down. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held discussions with European Union leaders and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels. The talks focus on contingency plans for new aid initiatives driven by concerns that the incoming Trump administration may significantly reduce U.S. support for Kyiv.
The diplomatic offensive never ends for the Ukrainian president, as 2025 may bring about massive changes to how the war in Ukraine will be conducted. Each day is of the essence for Kyiv's leadership. This is the last summit of the year for EU leaders. A time to make a summary of what has been accomplished in 2024 and what to look at in the coming months. One meeting in particular stood out, between the NATO Secretary General and Zelensky himself. These talks focus mainly on security guarantees, according to the Ukrainian president's office. Donald Trump isn't expected to support Ukraine to the same degree as the outgoing US administration. The summit's goal, therefore, is to lay the groundwork for a common European strategy to keep Ukraine in the fight, militarily or diplomatically, in the next year without jeopardizing its security.
Russian authorities have detained an Uzbek national following the assassination of Moscow's head of nuclear defense. Meanwhile, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has accused the United States and the United Kingdom of direct involvement in a war in Ukraine, labeling them as participants.
This is the man suspected by Russian authorities of having assassinated Igor Kirillov. They detained the Uzbek national after he apparently admitted to having carried out the attack. No group or individual has claimed responsibility for the attack officially, though a source at Ukraine's SBU has told Radio Free Europe that the attack was the result of a special operation conducted by Ukrainian services. Many fear, however, that the situation for Central Asian migrants in Russia will worsen in the wake of the alleged perpetrator's arrest. Following the attack on the Crocus City Hall earlier this year, many such migrants were persecuted and deported from Russia. Meanwhile, Dmitry Medvedev has not taken too kindly to a London-based paper calling the attack a legitimate act of defense by a threatened nation. He lashed out and said that Moscow should apply the same logic, accusing officials from NATO and Ukraine's allies of taking part in the conflict and labeled them legitimate military targets.
Georgian President Salam Zurabishvili has urged the European Union to provide greater assistance to pro-EU protesters in Georgia. She made her appeal during a speech to the European Parliament earlier this week.
The Georgian president has also urged European authorities to put pressure on the pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party. The aim of this pressure would be for the Georgian government to hold new elections after its decision to postpone EU negotiations. She reiterated that the previous elections were marred not only by fraud, but also by violence and Russian influence. The Georgian Electoral College recently voted in a new candidate for president who has the support of the Georgian Dream. Since the Georgian opposition has boycotted parliament, and as he was the only candidate, he won immediately. This was the first time the president was not chosen by national election. Both the incumbent president and the Georgian opposition have rejected this choice. Georgia has seen weeks of anti-government and pro-EU protests in the wake of the most recent parliamentary elections. The Georgian government has come under fire from Western leadership, including the United States, for its very harsh crackdown on the protesters.
And that's all for this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.